Hi everyone, so last weekend we had a Diablo 4 server slam, and obviously I've been blasting it quite a lot. And I figured I can just go through it and give my thoughts about how I felt the game has improved since March when the open beta was launched, and what I also think about the future of the game. Overall, I have to say that I'm very happy with the direction that the game is moving into. Personally, I've been having a blast both in March and in May. And now that we have seen the actual drop rates and that they have balanced the classes a little bit better, I think the game is in an even better spot than it already was. In general, I'm actually very impressed by the overall build and class balance in the game. Obviously, there are better than others, and some things just work better from the start, while other things just need certain combos to really get going. So this is pretty standard, and I'm not really too concerned about the overall balance of things. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't discover some insane, ridiculous combos later when the game actually comes out, when people are in the end game. I do have some candidates in my mind already that I'm going to talk about at another point of potentially really busted builds. But I think generally it's really cool the way that you can experiment with the builds, with the classes, and make a lot of viable, interesting setups possible. After playing all of the classes again, multiple times actually, and trying out basically all the different combinations of early game builds that I could think of, I definitely think that there's so much potential for the expression of your own creativity and your own build choices that it's going to be really fun to just even re-level the same character multiple times and trying something else. I know some people were upset that certain really OP things got nerfed. For example, Haida used to be very powerful and now it's not really that crazy anymore, but it's still okay, I guess. And the Necrominions were, a bit wonky, but they had hotfixed them actually during the weekend, so they got a lot better later. And overall, I think that all of the classes are in a relatively good spot when it comes to the early game experience. So you might have seen my other video that I made back in March after the open beta with my beta feedback, talking about the good, bad, stuff that should be fixed, class feedback, and my wish list. So obviously I wouldn't really expect all of this stuff to be implemented by the time that this server slam came around or even on launch. So, some of the stuff is definitely like long-term changes that I would have hoped for. But if you look at my class feedback here, for example, they have actually addressed quite some points that I felt were pretty important. It probably wasn't because of me necessarily, but at least they were kind of moving in the direction that I was hoping to see. So we see that, for example, in the early game, they have buffed Barb a little bit, for example, by buffing double swing, which I also felt to be a bit too weak. They have nerfed the shouts a little bit, which I felt were definitely way too mandatory in general. But nerfing the shouts definitely opened up some more utility choices, for example, Steel Grasp, Ground Stomp, Charge. I have actually been experimenting with these choices now in the May server slam compared to the March open beta, where I felt like every single bar build was almost just the same with shout, 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 and generator spender kind of thing. So now this definitely seems like there's a bit more freedom because the shouts are not really so oppressively powerful. So that was really cool, and I did actually make builds completely without shouts, and they were pretty fine. And for example, double swing actually felt really good playing that way. They've also nerfed some of those offensive legendary slots, for example, Limitless Rage, which was definitely one of those problematic powers, I think, that the Barbarians had access to and that other classes didn't. They also nerfed some other kind of like combo legendaries with that, like the Expectant, and they even nerfed the Upheaval stacking mechanic. So in general, I think this is a good move, because else I think that Upheaval in particular, maybe other builds as well on the Barb, would have been just so oppressively powerful with a very clunky playstyle on top of that, where you have to like attack with your generator like 10 times to stack up, like, plus 1000% damage or something, and then just do a big one-shot every like 10 seconds or so, which would overall end up relatively boring, I think. This also means that Barbarians are going to end up a little bit weaker in the end game because they don't have this insane combo potential anymore. So they're not really going to be like the, Omega most powerful class by far anymore, which was my expectation before the balance changes in the server slam. So I think they're probably going to be near the top maybe, or at least the second in place or so. They didn't really change a few other things here. For example, shouts that apply to other players. I think this might be a bit of a problem with forcing barbs into like some support role, or forcing groups to have a support barb and these kind of things. So this might be something that needs addressing, at least once we see like the group meta evolve. And also Unbridled Rage, okay, so they didn't really touch that now, but I guess you're gonna see also very soon after launch that this is pretty OP. Then we have the Druid. I actually really like the Druid in the Server Slam, I gotta say. Everyone probably agrees that they felt kind of slow and weak in the early game in open beta, but I think this has definitely turned around a little bit, especially with those changes to the companions. So if you play around the companions, they can kind of like carry on their own almost, and then you can combine this with some core skills. They improve the spirit generation, which I felt to be like an issue on some of those builds. And it overall felt more smooth in my opinion. I think actually my best leveling run, like 1 to 20, was actually on the Druid, playing a Shred Werewolf Druid, and then later swapping in the companions as well. Overall, I have to say though that I'm not really too happy that these skill-specific legendaries have not really been tuned down. So this doesn't just go for Druid, this goes for basically all classes. In almost every single case, if you want to play like a certain build, a certain core skill or something like that, you are basically forced to have the right aspect for that skill. There are some exceptions that are just super terrible and weak, like Rapid Fire or something like that, or Barrage. But in general, the skill-specific legendaries are just so oppressively powerful. They're like triple as strong or more than a regular offensive aspect. And I think it should be more on the side of like giving people choices to like alter a skill's behavior and not so much just boost its damage. I think it can always just boost the skill itself if you want to give it more damage, and then have legendary powers just, you know, change how it works, for example. You can even make it like mutually exclusive or something. So there's a bit like a choice if you want to do this or that, especially with the game, you know, getting patches after patches, introducing more legendaries. I would definitely imagine that there's going to be more skill-specific legendaries over time that actually do exactly that and change how a skill works, in addition to, you know, changing the upgrade on the skill tree or something like that. And in that case, I would really like to see, you know, more like optional powers that don't really just buff the damage itself, but maybe give it like more AoE or another effect or some chaining effect, or, you know, completely change what the skill does in some way. If you want to play a polarized Druid, then you should have the Shockwave aspect, because it literally like more than doubles the damage and gives it like double the AoE. So this is like just way too crazy compared to like, you know, the typical plus 20%, maybe plus 30% on a good day, like offensive legendary aspect. So I think they should definitely have a little bit more streamlined those item powers. Then we have the Necros. So I think this was pretty obvious from the open beta. Necromancers were super overtuned in the early game. Everything was just dying, basically one shot. And then you had the minions that were just obliterating everything around you as well. So they did tune down, I think, both the damage and the survivability of minions. It definitely feels more appropriate now, and not, you know, where you're in a spot where you need to have minions and you can also actually sacrifice them now relatively early to gain some other benefits. They'd also buffed some of the other skills. I think Bloodlance was buffed. I'm not sure about Blood Surge. I tried a lot of different things on the Necromancer and it all felt just like fine, I would say. I was not really having any trouble. Nothing really felt really OP. My main gripe with Necromancer remains they have like way too few skills. They don't really have a mobility skill, so this is something that I hope will be addressed, potentially even in just like a seasonal update or something in the future. Maybe I could give them like, you know, an extra curse, maybe some mobility skill. I would imagine that in an expansion or so, we're gonna get new skills for all classes, but maybe Necros should get something before that, because I feel like they just have like too few tools available. Then we have the Rogues that did actually get out of this Server Slam patch relatively, yeah, plus minus 0, I guess. So the imbuements were a bit nerfed, which is fine. So I think that imbuements were definitely like overrepresented, and they are still pretty good, even with a 13 seconds cooldown instead of a 9 seconds cooldown. But one thing that I really liked about the imbuement nerfs is that it actually opened up some more utility choices. I think that Rogue was already extremely good on that end. Like, okay, you have 5 core skills, and this is pretty much about it. You don't have like mastery skills like the Swords, for example, or, you know, some crazy combinations that you can do on a Druid. So Rogue is like, on the surface, a relatively simple class with those 5 core skills, but then you have like 3 or 4 or even 5 skill slots that you can just fill with whatever you want, basically, with imbuements, with smoke grenade, with traps, you know, anything. And now this diversity in how you customize your build has improved even more because the imbuements don't feel so necessary anymore. So I think this actually has made Rogue even more fun and has opened my eyes, at least, for adding in even more like tags in my builds that I wasn't thinking of before because the imbuements were too good. The two things that I remain unhappy with are Rain of Arrows. I just don't really see much hope for this skill. And Caltrops, it is a relatively powerful support skill, but on the other hand, it's like so clunky to use that I'd rather prefer Caltrops to be a little bit weaker, but less clunky to use. And with this jump and all that, it just doesn't really feel great. And finally, we have the Sorcerers. So you might have seen my little video about the Incinerate enchantment. That was just a meme, basically. It has slightly improved, so it seems like they were trying to do something there. I think this just needs another look again, because it was still kind of spawning off screen and stuff. I think it should just have like a way shorter like range around you where it can spawn. And then I have a few more points here about various builds for Sorcerers. I think in general, Sorcerers are going to be somewhere like middle of the pack, just pretty good, pretty mobile, you know, not really too tanky, not really too squishy. So I think they're going to be just fine on basically all fronts. And for the endgame builds, it will mostly come down to trying to find like some really insane combos with the enchantment slots, with certain like triggers and lucky hits and all that to really pop off. And nothing about that has changed. So I think that especially for like the theory crafting happy crowd, Sorcerers is going to be like a really cool class. You can also take another look at the needs fixing list that I made here. So number one priority was the hardcore for me. So obviously I'm going to be blasting hardcore, and hardcore is going to be kind of like the, you know, most competitive mode, I imagine, in the future. So this is probably where all the interesting stuff happens. And it's still completely broken. So I tried a few things and it seemed like nothing really has changed. This Code of Escape still didn't trigger. You can still insta-log out. You can actually still revive your character after you have died on your screen by using the task manager. You can DC whenever you want and live and all that stuff. So yeah, the only thing that has really changed is that you can't reset dungeons, but that doesn't matter because you can just log out if you want to. So potentially you could even log in and not even reset a dungeon and just try the same thing again that you were trying to get out of. So I'm not sure about that. Yeah, most of the stuff has not been addressed. So at least on launch, I guess hardcore is going to be in a relatively bad spot when it comes to actually feeling like hardcore, when it comes to competitiveness, because people are just going to abuse everything on this list here to its maximum potential. So, you know, people will just try to avoid dying at all costs, obviously. And in terms of, like, you know, trying to have like a real like competitive aspect to hardcore, we are far away from that, I think. So for me, this is very sad news, I gotta say. And on top of that, there is also this new recipe of Elixir of Death Evasion or something like that, that does not bode well for hardcore either. That sounds very much like a cheat death effect. Actually, there is something like that in the data mine that shows us that this is actually a thing. And we already had the problem that sorcerers had Flame Shield enchant that allows them to cheat death every 2 minutes. And even when it's on cooldown, you can actually swap it to another enchant. So you don't even have a downside of waiting for it to cool down. So now it seems like they just made this an elixir as well, so that you can basically never die. Especially with this instant logout or Scroll of Escape, or, you know, inviting yourself from your second account so you can accept the TP. Cheat deaths were already a huge problem in Diablo 3 in hardcore, in my opinion. So I think that they have no place in Diablo 4. You know, if you don't want to die, then just play softcore. You know, that's as simple as that. You know, if you want to give people a chance to just never die, then there is a mode for that already that everyone else is playing. So why do we have it in hardcore? Then we had the point about the exponentially scaling defensive mechanics like Challenging Shout and to a lesser degree Dark Shroud. They have nerfed Challenging Shout a little bit, but it seems like with high enough ranks in the end game and with enough Shout synergies, you'll probably still just become invincible with a barb. So that's still a problem. And unless there is like some hidden cap or something with Challenging Shout just like not giving you more than a certain % damage reduction, you're just going to reach 100% at some point with enough extra ranks. So this probably still will become an issue and will have to be fixed, but we'll see about that. They have fixed the permanent Blood Mist, but on the other hand, they kind of like butchered that skill and that combo in general, so that's a bit sad. It just seems like over nerfed in my opinion, so maybe that can be brought up again. They have fixed instance hopping, at least to some degree, at least on the world bosses, for example. You cannot just farm the same world boss over and over anymore in the same spawn window, so that's really nice. So I think this was definitely really weird, like all this like, instance hopping, inviting other people to parties and mega farm events like every 30 seconds, farming rare spawns all the time with instance hopping, like all this stuff with relogging party invites should not really be a thing. So this just breaks the immersion, this breaks the gameplay flow. This makes group play way more powerful than solo play. So all of the stuff needs to be addressed, and at least they are trying a little bit already. And they have fixed most of the other stuff here as well. So animation cancelling is gone. Widescreen has been mostly adjusted, not entirely, but it's kind of like close enough, I'd say. There could still be like a small tweak, in my opinion, to really bring it to parity, because widescreen is still slightly better. In some cases, there are actually some skills they have forgotten, so widescreen is a lot better for those. But outside of that, yeah, we definitely not really all forced to get, such a screen anymore. So that's pretty nice. They also fixed the AI bugs, I believe. And yeah, most of the other stuff was a bit minor here. There were other miscellaneous changes that they have made in the server slam that I did not have on my list. For example, they changed the dungeon layouts a little bit. So this was not really a problem for me, but yeah, a lot of other people seem to have an issue with that. And it definitely seems a bit improved. I think that, dungeons just feel a bit more streamlined. I felt like I don't really have to look at the map all too much when I go through a dungeon. So it seems pretty nice. So I'm quite happy to see that they are also trying to make improvements on that end, for example. And just in general, the performance improvements that they have made, like the game was running a lot smoother on my PC compared to back in March, where I was literally playing on the minimum graphics everywhere, despite me having like a 3080 and all that. So it was a bit of a struggle back then, but now in Server Slam it was way better. I was playing on high graphics, I was streaming, everything was fine. So that was really nice to see. And I know that not everything has been fixed there. I heard from some people still having some issues, and I guess they're going to make continuous improvements on that end as well. The loading screens also felt a bit better and more smooth. This was like a bit of a concern I had, that it just felt like there was too much downtime whenever you like change areas and stuff. So I think they have also made, other, I think, all kinds of performance improvements, which is really nice. So to sum this all up, I think the game has definitely taken some steps in the right direction. I'm quite happy with the overall balance changes they have made for all the classes, with some of the other changes like the reset dungeon button, the layout, the performance, etc. that is all just highlighted. So I'm quite happy to see that the game is moving forward and they are responsive to feedback. And of course, this is not the end of it. This is just the beginning. There's going to be a lot of patches, I guess, even post-launch, before this first season. There's probably going to be some hot fixes, some bug fixes. All this kind of stuff is probably to be expected. And then, of course, we have the regular updates that will happen from season to season, where the game can just like improve and grow over time. And if they keep going at a similar pace that we have seen pre-launch, when the game actually is out, then I am very content with that. Of course, with a fresh, new, massive game like Diablo 4, there are tons of topics to talk about in a lot more detail than what I've done now. So I just kind of like glanced over the classes and all that. So I'll go more into detail about basically everything I can think of. Not just now, but as the game progresses, I will definitely have my other feedback to share. And that's it for now. So let me know what you think. Let me know how you like the Server Slam, especially in comparison to the March Open Beta, for example. Or just what are your thoughts in general about what I have said with my feedback. That's it. Hope you liked this one, and I'll see you guys next time.